Hi everyone, I'm John. Welcome back to my channel. At the first part of this year, I don't remember what month it was, Princeton University Press contacted me and said they would be interested in supporting Historathon 2023, something we've had going on since the beginning of the year, in which we break up the entirety of human history into 4 chunks, and the years associated with those chunks you can find in pretty much every Historathon video, so I'll leave those for you to find. But they told me that they would be interested in sending me 4 books, one for each quarter that we were dedicating an era to. And they sent me 4 books. I told them that I would show them on my channel, which I've already done, and that I would read each book as the quarters passed and post a review on my channel. So I read last month the book that I promised to talk about in the 3rd quarter. And the book that they sent me and that I wanted to share my thoughts on was this one. In Humboldt Shadow, A Tragic History of German Ethnology by H. Glenn Penny. Over the summer of 2021, there was a new museum called the Humboldt Forum that opened in Berlin, which combined the acquisitions of the Ethnological Museum of Berlin and the Museum of Asian Art. This book by H. Glenn Penny is one of the newest editions of the vast range of books out there that comment on the role of the museum, especially ethnological museums, whose collections were largely built around imperialistic practices and other means of coercion. So questions about imperialism, artifact repatriation, and how both of these relate to the building of contemporary museums has been, something that fascinated me since I read a book by someone who also writes in this area, whose name is James Cuno. He wrote a book called Who Owns Antiquity? Museums and the Battle Over Our Ancient Heritage. And I read that and reviewed a book on my channel a decade ago in 2013. Also posted a review on Goodreads. So despite the title, the role of Alexander von Humboldt remains very much in the background of the book. He's certainly discussed, but he's not discussed in a lot of depth. Humboldt is regarded as one of the founding figures of ethnological studies, and he wanted to engage in a vast study, something that he would never be able to accomplish as a single person in a single lifetime. Despite the fact that he lived to a relatively old age, but this would take dozens, hundreds, thousands of people over generations to complete a huge study of the world's people, with the goal of creating a kind of key to the fundamentals of all human culture. Those indispensable facts that were essential to and the sort of foundation for all human cultures. There's a long quote about Humboldt's belief from Penny's book, which will give some insight into what Humboldt's goal ultimately was all about. And I'll read it for you. It's not terribly long. Quote, while traveling the world, Bastian, who is one of the ethnologists that he discusses, had seen patterns among people's actions and their creations. He saw, for example, the emergence of priestly classes worldwide, similar uses of fetishes and religion in different parts of the world, similar needs among vastly different peoples to erect monuments to gods, to ancestors, or as expressions of self. He believed that the consistencies and differences in such patterns offered him ways to get at fundamental modes of thought, basic, elementary ideas shared by all people across space and time. There was, he continually argued, a number of psychological original elements that coursed through the heads of all people in all times and history. That's from page 24 of the hardback edition, which I read. So, to put the matter in Bastian's own words from one of his own books that he published in 1860, here's another quote. If the incidental features of narration in nursery tales and proverbs, sayings, and modes of speech, we encounter the same idea, be it in England or Abyssinia, in India or Scandinavia, in Spain or in Tahiti, in Mexico, as well as Greece. If we look carefully enough, it will be the same ideas which emerge from the hiding place of ethnic peculiarities and manifest themselves in the thoughts and of mankind in a fashion that, unless perceived as being a part of a cosmic harmony, appears to be incomprehensible. So basically, this idea that human culture is such a vastly rich but seemingly unified thing was central to Humboldt project, and also the people who were very influenced by Humboldt, like this guy, Bastian. In scouring the world for priceless cultural artifacts, Bastian believed that museum goers would produce a kind of, and this is his word, Gedankenstatistik, which is a German mashup for a word that means roughly statistic of ideas, something like that, which would allow museum goers to make observations and draw their own conclusions about the nature of those fundamental acts and facts that undergird human nature that Humboldt is talking about and then Bastian is talking about via Humboldt. But Penny spends the majority of the book's short 200 or so pages detailing the lives and the academic pursuits of a small group of ethnographers, and he describes their trips during which they gained many of the objects to take back to these German museums. Because the narrative is so steeped in several episodes where questionable behavior is exposed and discussed, the topics of nationalism, globalism, and imperialism don't come right out and hit you in the face as ready-made suspects for attack. Instead, Penny sort of tells the stories and the subjects arise organically out of these ethnologists' lives and academic work and their travels. The first chapter, for example, introduces the work of Adolphe Bastien through the acquisition of a Hawaiian feather cloak, a Haida totem pole, and a series of Mayan sculptures. Bastien was torn between Humboldt's ideal of creating a totalizing picture of human culture, into which all human ethnography could fit, as I've already discussed, but also creating a gigantic collection of artifacts, which he both gathered himself and enlisted others to collect for him. Subsequent chapters in the book look at the work of people like Felix von Luschen and the American director for the Hamburgisches Museum von Völkerkunde, the Hamburger Museum for the People's Arts. I think that would translate to roughly in German. Whose name was Franz Turner. Penny looks at their correspondence, the goals behind building museums that they're responsible for, and the various sort of accoutrements of the global networks that supported them in their ventures as they faced obstacles like bureaucracies and budgetary constraints and other things that would understandably be associated with traveling, looking for these items, and building a museum. Penny's ideal audience here, he says, is the general reader, No, I don't know a lot of casual readers who are going to pick up a book on German ethnology in the half century leading up to World War One, but it sounded interesting to me. And in all fairness, I was one of those very non-academic readers, so maybe there is a wider audience out there. Penny takes his time to immerse the reader in the history of these ethnographers and their travels. He doesn't just dive headfirst into the topics like I mentioned, like imperialism, like nationalism, and how they affect the ongoing nature of ethnographic acquisition. He does write very sympathetic portraits that also never fail to criticize the practices of the people that he's writing about. In the end, though, and here's my major criticism of the book, I wanted a book dealing more with the issues around Humboldt's ethnology, his ideas about museology, and how the two were influenced by an increasingly acquisition driven culture. That aspect of the discussion is certainly present, but Penny's narrative is couched much more, like I've already suggested, in the lives and the journeys uh, on the road in Central and South America largely, but the South Pacific and other parts of the world as well. Where they traveled and where they went to go collect these artifacts. And since I'm more interested in the ideas, the ethnography itself, the lasting influence of imperialism, more than the actual lives and travels of the people, I thought that the title, the subtitle of the book, which again is The Tragic History of German Ethnology, was a little bit misleading maybe, and aligned less with my interests than I might have preferred. For those who are interested in the individual lives and travels of the ethnologists themselves, instead of the broader, more theoretical questions that their work directly contributes to, this book might hold more value for you than it did for me, and might be of more interest for you than it was for me. A fascinating subject. I just wish the focus would have been on other questions instead about the lives and travels in Humboldt's shadow. A Tragic History of German Ethnology by H. Gwen Penny. Let me know if you have any comments or questions, or if you've read this book below, and I will see you next time.